Hello everybody and welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me. Tonight we'll be discussing missing people and a possible cryptid connection to them. Earlier this week I was asked by a fellow researcher if I knew of any cases that resemble the missing 401 files that you hear about in Canada and the US. Where people have vanished in areas that are connected to cryptid reports. So I thought I'd share some of the ones from the UK with you. Sadly, it's impossible to get official figures for how often this has happened over the years. Even the national parks will not give any information on the number of people who vanish in forested areas in the UK annually. Many of my listeners in the UK will know of cases like this close to their home. Some prime hotspots are RAF Bempton and Cannock Chase, but it happens all across Great Britain. In an area of Wales, there is a mystery surrounding the disappearance of Trevaline Evans. Now, Trevaline is a 52-year-old woman who vanished without a trace from her antique shop in LLangollan on Saturday, the 16th of June 1990. Trevaline opened her shop, Attic Antiques, on Church Street at the usual time of 9:30. She had parked her dark blue Escort about 200 yards away. During the morning, she had many friends call in and visitors and people who come to buy things from the shop, and each and every one of them said she appeared relaxed, happy, and had made plans to go out the night after she finished work. The weather that day, according to the police, was sunny and the town centre was busy, but with no unusual activity. About 20 to 1, Trevaline left a note on the front door of her shop saying that she'd be back in 2 minutes. She was never seen again. It is known that she bought an apple and a banana and was seen crossing nearby Castle Street, as a banana skin was found in a dustbin in the shop after this time, so it's thought she must have returned there. However, this has never been confirmed, but Evans' handbag, car keys and jacket, along with fruit and flowers that she'd intended to take home, were left behind in the shop, and her car remained parked where it had been left. The last confirmed sighting of her was near her home, around about 2:30, which is just on Market Street. There were two more suspected sightings, but they couldn't be proven. One at 2:35 p.m. of a woman matching her description, seen walking along town towards the A5, towards Corwin. And she was walking beside the Riverside Park. At 3:45, there was another sighting, this time of a woman walking into Park Avenue from the direction of the River Dee. Every household in LLangollan, as well as scores of people from further afield, were interviewed. More than 1,500 names were checked, and about 700 vehicles were eliminated from the inquiry. Searches of the River Dee and the canal, the mine shafts and caves in LLangollan area were carried out, but no trace was found. An artist's impression of a man in a blazer apparently seen near the shop was drawn and circulated, but was no use to the investigation. Her husband was arrested in 2001, but the police had nothing to charge him with and they had to release him. In 1993, police sniffer dogs searched a canal near LLangollan after a woman wrote to the police station that she had been overwhelmed by a feeling that Trevaline was nearby. But to date, nothing has been found to explain where she went or where she ended her journey of life. And none of the belongings that she had on her were found over the intervening years. So where are her shoes and her clothes? The antique shop and the areas where she was said to have been seen, those areas are very close to the River Dee. Along the railway line, there is access to woodland where a dark, upright, dog-like creature was seen in 2016. A woman who lives on a rural farm in the area said, "I live in North Wales, in the mountains, not far from LLangollan. And this is a new home for us, and we've lived here for almost a year now. In a very old house that no one has lived in for 30 years, which is built in between two old yew trees. We have 4 acres of woodland coppice behind the cottage, and that banks onto a wood that leads to the forest nearby. And when we moved in, I started to explore the land behind the garden near the house and work out where I was going to put the polytunnel, and plan the possibility of creating a forest garden and kind of sort out the clearing space for things. It's pretty wild and thick with brambles, etc. I should explain that I'm a herbalist, so I grow and forage almost daily. And as soon as I went up to the first level and looked to the left, where it was quite heavily wooded and dark, I seen a rhododendron bush. And I felt immediately uneasy, which is odd for me, because I love the woods and go out foraging, etc. And I always felt at home and out and about in the wilderness. A few days after clearing the space for the polytunnel, we had a bonfire to get rid of all the brash. It was damp, so the fire made a lot of smoke until it eventually got going and burned itself down. It was getting dark and I needed to put the tea on, so I left my partner to keep an eye on the fire and off I went. It was a good 20 minutes later. He came running into the house saying something was sliding down the bank towards him, but he couldn't see a thing. He could hear it, and he could tell it was getting nearer and nearer, and he was really genuinely scared. He said he couldn't see anything. The next thing that happened that was unusual was when I was sat up in a hazel coppice, just chilling out. I was watching the squirrels and everything, and all of a sudden, there was a big whoosh next to me. It came from behind, as if something big had flown past my head, and I could feel the wind it made on my face as it passed. And I really expected to see a buzzard fly down or perch on one of the trees, but there was nothing at all to be seen. And that was really impossible because of where it would have had to fly to exit the wood. I'd have seen it. It was a whooshing rush of wind, and it was not long after this that I finally saw the creature. I was walking my dog in the late afternoon in the beginning of October 2019. I decided to go down to the river, which is a small wooden bridge that you can cross it on, an ancient pathway there, near a very old church not far from our cottage. I got to where there's a big oak tree on the bank that looks down into the ravine, which the river flows through. That's where the bridge is. The trail then leads off onto another pathway, which takes you to an old farm. And as I looked down towards the bridge, I could see something, and it was big and black, and it was coming down that path, running towards the bridge from the direction of the old farm. I actually thought, oh shit, because the cows roam free here, and you know how they can be when the dogs are around. But as it got nearer, it became clear to me that I was looking at was not a cow or a sheep or anything like that. It was jet black, and it looked like a giant wolf, but it was walking upright on two legs. It had broad shoulders and arms, and it had a thin waist compared to the rest of its body. I cannot say that it had canine legs or front-facing knees or anything like that, but it was definitely upright, just like a human would be. It stopped at the end of the path and was just stood, looking towards the bridge, and its chest was heaving, like it was having trouble breathing, or it just, there was no breath to it. It was trying to get its breath back, and for a few seconds, I just stared at it in disbelief, and then all of a sudden it was gone. A few weeks later, I cleared a path near the falling spruce that leads to a gate at the end of our wood. It wasn't too much work, and after clearing brambles and, bending and snapping a few branches out of the way, it was done. The next day, I went out to use the path and I'd cleared, and at the entrance to it, there was a hazel branch that had been bent over, and it was being held down by a broken log, literally blocking the path I'd made. I went and got my partner and asked him what he thought, because to me, there was no way that could have happened on its own, in my mind anyway, and he agreed. I have not moved the log or used the path because I feel Something doesn't want me going in that part of the woods. Last summer, before I saw the creature down near the bridge, I decided to get a dog from the local rescue. And I obviously took him up to the woods to explore and have a bit of fun, playing with a stick. I didn't really know why, but he kept running off, as if to chase something. And I thought it was squirrels, because we have a lot of them here. But when I caught up with him, he would just stand barking, with his hackles up, and he'd be there barking at a tree, just at thin air, which I thought was very odd. And day by day it got worse, and he would just stand near the house, barking at the fence and the gate that led to the wood. And if you took him out of the same, walk, he'd do the same thing over and over again. Sadly, he never settled, and we had to find a quieter home for him. We do have a new dog, and she too is experiencing things on the land and at home. I spoke to our witness, and we both realised that she was very much connected to the earth and nature. And the home is built between two yew trees, and as we know, that can sometimes be a gateway into the fairy realm. I think it's a connection to the land that's important here, because there is another report of a bear-like creature seen by a wild camper and his son just a few years ago now. Wild camper's known as Micah, and he contacted me because he'd seen a creature. He couldn't identify it in the LLangollan area. He said it was 2017. Mikey told me himself he was certain that he'd seen the same bear-like creature seen in the area by other campers when he was camping with his son. He explained that he saw a large-bodied, hair-covered creature which was close to his camp, and it moved off into the brush when it got close. Now, this area is known for big cat sightings, and Mikey himself has seen cats in the area. So one time he told me about being stalked by a big cat. In turn, he stalked that cat that day and found out where it went, but he could not identify the creature he saw in 2017. Now, there is a further account at the Ponderosa Cafe where a couple saw what they described as a large black bear that was walking upright like a human. Now, I'm not suggesting that Mrs. Evans was the victim of a cryptid creature. I'm just exploring the correlation. But what I have noticed is that in a number of the places where we have strange disappearances, we also see reports of cryptid creatures. Is the land there cursed? And is this why people are affected by it or vanish because of it? There is also a high number of people take their own life in these areas. Now, this happens globally and not just in the UK. Over the years, people have been making the connection themselves, now that it's far easier to access information on the web. Now, there's one case in the UK that's very puzzling, and it's puzzled online sleuths for a couple of years now. And it still baffles me, not only in the vanishing of the female driver, but also in the way she seemed to act against most women's natural instinct, when they find themselves in a dangerous situation. But first, let's look at the cryptid reports in the area. In one of the cases, a man is physically pulled from his tent by something unseen. And this happened in the Dundonald Hill area. Now, it's said that fearful locals have been reporting a strange ape-like beast that has been seen on several occasions in the Dundonald area. For centuries, it is said that the hill of Dundonald was the home of a horrible creature, and not many people dared venture out onto the hills alone, or without good reason. The dogs of people walking, or the ones owned by the castle, were said to become very restless, agitated and excited at times, while looking out towards the hill, barking and yelping. But never, under any circumstances, would they wander up there. And that's the same behaviour as the dogs on the farm. It's said that frightened locals have reported shadows that haunt the trees. One badly shaken man related how when walking on the hill, he heard whispering voices behind him. On turning around, he saw nothing, and this happened 2 or 3 times before he decided to take solace with a stiff drink in the local bar. Another man reported seeing two ghostly, squat-shaped, featureless shadows that were trailing him by hiding behind the nearby trees. These shadows then merged together and became one, growling and then growing to twice their size. And he then left the hill, not wanting to see what happened next. The same entity has also been described as being able to jump straight into the branches of the trees. Dundonald Hill is said to exude an air of oppressiveness, and several people have taken their own lives, and at least one murder has happened there in modern times. Now, we don't know what happened back in time, what the land went through. It could hold the essence of something brooding and evil. Josephine Aldridge from England says she will never go up Dundonald Hill again as long as she lives. She had recently been spending a little time in Kilmarnock in the summer of 1994. Deciding on a day out, she visited Dundonald Castle. Now, whilst walking on the hill, her two Labrador dogs suddenly went berserk. They were running around in circles, growling and snapping at the air, before finally slinking to the ground as far as they could go, with their tails tucked beneath them. The poor things were then seen crawling backwards in obvious terror. Then Josephine saw this huge creature, which appeared some distance to the side of her. She hadn't noticed it before, and she was certain that if it had been there earlier, she would most certainly have seen it. It did not seem to be solid, as Josephine could see the grass of the hill through its body, but it was covered in longish charcoal-coloured hair. It made no indentations in the grass, and Josephine, on reflection, thought it almost ghost-like. She said, the thing that struck the most terror was its eyes. She described them as two long slits which glowed a bright red colour. She said it had two holes where the nose should have been, and very thick lips. In fact, it was not dissimilar to a gorilla in shape and stance, although it stood well over 10 feet tall on two legs. Now, when confronted by the strange sight, Josephine began to pray. Now, the creature, after a few moments, slowly faded out of sight, but the dog's attitude never changed, and Josephine felt sure that the monster was still around. Josephine left Dundonald Hill in a hurry, not too far behind her whimpering dogs. Now, a other local man, using the pseudonym George, said that he liked to spend a lot of time fishing, walking and camping in the area, and he decided to spend a night on the hill during the summer of 1993. George took along his dog, who had never left his side since it had been a pup. He arrived just after the sun began to set. He erected his one-man tent, deciding to settle down with a book before turning in for the night. He lay on top of his sleeping bag, fully dressed. After about an hour, George saw a shadow pass by the side of his tent. It was caught in the lamplight. He thought it strange that nobody would be in the area this time of night. Again, the shadow loomed over the tent. It was at this point that George heard a terrible sound. It was a rasping, breathing noise right up to the tent. But by now, he'd convinced himself that some of his friends had followed him up and were playing a joke on him. So he thought he wouldn't react, and he lay down again with his book and tried to ignore it. But he said his heart then leapt into his mouth as the whole tent began to shake violently, as though somebody had tripped over the guide rope. And at this, George went outside to look, his nervousness turning to apprehension when he found the area outside totally deserted. He quickly went back inside the tent, securing the flaps as tight as he could, and by this time his dog was whimpering, cowering in the corner, and then the tent began to sway, as if caught in strong winds. George sat on top of his sleeping bag, now too scared to even contemplate sleeping. The secured flaps suddenly burst wide open, and the dog, who had never left Georgie's side, gave out an almighty yelp and ran off into the darkness. Someone or something then grabbed hold of Georgie's ankle. Slowly but surely, the man was pulled out of his tent, and he could see no one, and he struggled desperately, but the grip did not loosen. When he'd been pulled about 10 feet clear of the tent's entrance, the invisible force lifted George clear off the floor. His head was about 2 inches off the grass. The sky became black, and a huge thunderclap rang out, and a streak of lightning flashed across the sky. And then suddenly, the grip lessened, and this thing let go of his ankle, and George fell limp onto the grass, petrified. George ran back to the tent, the sky clearing as he did so. He then spent a very tense night, sat at the entrance of the tent, being too scared to make his way home in the darkness, jumping at every little noise that the night made, which seemed to surround him like some huge black blanket. He'd call the dog often, but each time the dog failed to answer. Morning eventually came, and after packing away his belongings, he headed down the hill, and as he reached the bottom, his dog came bounding out of the undergrowth towards him, and they both went home together. George has never been up the hill since, and he has no intentions of ever doing so again. He can offer no explanation as to what happened to him, only that it was very real. He does express some hurt at the dog leaving him, a thing which it had never done before. But as dogs, unlike humans, do not question their gut instincts, I have no doubt it hid itself away from danger. It was acting on primal instinct. I say often, don't I? Us humans are the only creatures on the planet that reason away their natural instinct. In the next case, I have a hard time understanding why the lady who became stranded within half a mile of a well-lit town walked a mile in the opposite direction at night into dark fields. The only explanation I can come up with is that she thought something prevented her from getting to safety. Now, just south of Dundonald, along the coast road, there's a small town of Moncton, which itself has a strange mystery attached to it concerning an ape-like creature, and also the mystery of a lone female who was found killed by foxes and badgers. In January of 1999, the police of the area were contacted by several people who reported an escaped baboon. A spokesperson for Strathclyde Police said, "We received a call from a local man who said he'd narrowly avoided hitting a baboon-like creature on Shaw Farm Road." A patrol car was sent out, and after a search of the area, the officers reported seeing an animal of some sort that they couldn't describe, and they said they could not be sure what it was. Checks were made at the airport, which had received a large cargo of livestock, but there were no reports of any escaped baboons, apes or animals. On the 10th of January 2022, it was reported in the local metro that a woman's body had been found eaten by foxes after she left her broken down car on a dark night. The unidentified 55-year-old was found by sniffer dogs in Moncton on December the 19th. Now, it's believed her body may have been partially eaten by badgers or foxes in a field a mile from the spot where her car broke down. The 55-year-old from Airdrie was waiting for roadside assistance to arrive in mid-December when she walked a mile away from a stranded vehicle and into nearby fields in the west of the county. Police found her body less than a week before Christmas at around 5 to 5 p.m. on December the 19th. They'd been conducting a missing person inquiry after the woman's Citroen was found empty the day before near the coastal village of Moncton. A Police Scotland spokesman said, Around 11:20 p.m. on December the 18th, police were called to a report of a possible abandoned car on an unclassified road. Officers attended, and the initial investigations failed to trace the registered keeper, and officers started a missing person inquiry. The spokesperson added a day later that the woman's body was recovered in a field approximately 1 mile from where the car was discovered. The area where this happened is less than a mile away from where the police searched for the baboon. Is there a connection between these cases? That really isn't my main question, although it is prevalent. I think my main question is, why did she leave that car? The weather that night was typical for the area for winter, and the car was a warmer option to wait for road recovery to attend. We know from the newspaper reports that she did request this, but as she was not at the car when the mechanics arrived, there was nothing that he could do. We are taught to stay with the car. Even so, if she thought she'd have more luck walking into town for help, why did she go in completely the opposite direction? I think most females and males would have stayed on the lane and walked towards the lights, hoping to get out from a car passing by. But she didn't. In fact, she went the opposite way, away from the lights, into a dark field where she was eventually found. Very strange all round, and I think we would all agree on that. Another area of the UK where there is a strange report of a missing girl that also has reports of mystery ape-like creatures seen by locals in the area is Boxhill in Surrey. Boxhill is well known in paranormal circles, yet it also has a sinister mystery after a young girl took a taxi to the hill and vanished, never to be seen again. A report was made in 2012, and the witness in that case said, "I was by the stepping stones in the summer of 2012 when this happened. It was late evening, and I was running on the steps leading up the hill. During my training session, I'd heard what I now believe to be wood knocking. I can't say how many knocks I heard, because at the time my focus was on training, and I didn't know then that wood knocks have been linked to what I was about to see. I just remember thinking to myself, what's that noise? As it was so loud, but distant, and it seemed to come from several directions at once. I finished my training session and sat down on the steps to drink my recovery drink and just enjoy the cooler air of the summer evening. It was about 25 minutes before anything happened. It was still daylight. I could hear footsteps coming down the hill. I didn't look around at this point, as I was expecting a dog walker to go by me. I was sitting to the side out of the way. I then realised the person walking down the stairs had stopped. I could hear the sound of breathing. I had an unsettled feeling come over me that I was being watched. So I turned and looked over my right shoulder. And standing there, about 10 metres back to my right side and up the steps, was what I honestly believe to be some sort of ape. The fur was brown in colour with patches of grey. The face was very human, with a flat nose, but the jaw was big. It looked out of proportion to the head, which was domed at the top. The animal stood on two legs, but appeared to slump forward, and the arms were long in proportion to the body. The animal was very thickly built, and I can only say solid of muscle. It was frightening on the build of this thing. I'm not sure the height from the angle I was at. I could only estimate probably 6 foot plus, but I'm not sure. The animal stood staring at me for about 30 seconds before turning around and walking off, still watching me. As it left, I could smell a stale farm animal type smell that kind of lingered in the air. I did hear someone had said a creature like this had been seen running along the zigzags by several motorists. I've never been able to get this confirmed, and Surrey police don't seem to want to discuss the subject. Now, other reports in the area include a number of people who have been suddenly overcome by that feeling of dread, and a number of large black cats have also been reported in high numbers in the area. But I think the most disturbing case is that of Ruth Wilson, who vanished mysteriously in November 1995 when her home was searched for her. Nothing was found. She'd left her home in Betchman, Surrey in the afternoon. Ruth was 16 when she disappeared. She didn't have any lessons in the morning, so she stayed at home till about 11:30 a.m. when she took a taxi into Dorking. And about 12 noon, she went to the florist, where she ordered a bouquet that was to be delivered to her mother. She then went to the library, where she stayed until about 4 p.m. and was last seen at the Hand in Hand pub near Boxhill at about 4:30 p.m. when a taxi driver dropped her off there. And that was the last positive sighting of her. In the days following her disappearance, a number of friends and members of the public reported seeing Ruth around the Dorking area. There were also numerous reported sightings from all across Britain, following the national media coverage of the case. However, in the 11 years since she went missing, Ruth's family have had no contact from her, and police have received no further calls or clues to her whereabouts. Following her disappearance, Surrey police launched an extensive investigation to try and locate her. Police officers, together with a police helicopter and police dogs, searched the Boxhill area where she was last seen. Officers were joined by members of the public in the search, but nothing was found. Over the years, people have suggested foul play, either at her own hand or by another's, to explain Ruth's disappearance. But usually, in cases like that, eventually the clothes of the person are found by a dog walker or hikers in the area. Nothing has been found since Ruth went missing, so there are no clues as to what happened to her. A recent video I made on the Boxhill area of Surrey prompted a local dog walker who uses the heath just to the north-west of Boxhill to share their strange experience that he had while walking his dog. He said, "I live in Surrey, near a heavily wooded area, Heathland. I walked my dog there one summer evening. It got darker quicker than I realised. The area I was in has a lot of deer and rabbits that aren't easily spooked by human presence. Easy prey, you might say. I've never spoken about this event. There's a cut through to the woods. It was so dark out that unless you knew the path, you wouldn't know it was there. The dog I had at the time was a rescue dog, a bull cross lurcher, and he was on a tight leash, as he was not good with other animals at all. In fact, he was fearless. As I walked him, something crashed through the undergrowth to my left, and you could hear it skidding along the ground. It was pitch black. I let out a scared scream, thinking it was a badger. I'm thinking, it'll hear me and turn and run. But it didn't run off. I expected my dog to defend me, but he didn't. He acted very strange. He didn't look back. He just kept going, as if to say, this isn't for me. My mind easily went immediately to the process the fact that the noise was heavy, and the skidding noise was the sound of something large, and it was not a dog, not a fox, not a deer, not a badger, not a wild boar, as my dog for sure would have attacked any of those. I headed home puzzled at what had happened. A few weeks later at dusk, we were on the heathland, which skirted another woodland, and I began to hear knocking on the trees that was coming from deeper in the wood. The dog looked at me, and I looked at him. I dismissed this as teenage kids in the wood. I just headed off, and as I turned to look from a safe distance, I heard it again. And this was deep in the woods, in summer, and from where the knocking was coming from, there's no way that at that distance I was away that anyone would still be able to not see me. I've seen other people out there at this distance. I'm an outdoor person. I've been that all my life. I have a lot of countryside knowledge, and this is my true account, and I can't explain it. I mean, once again, thanks to the dog, our witness was aware of the danger he was in. I've seen this behaviour in my own dogs, and it terrified me. I knew that they were scared of nothing. So to see them scover their bellies and crawl backwards told me I had something to fear that I couldn't see. I always hated that part of the wood, and I never went into it again after that happened. One case that I feel is a must to include in tonight's show is the case of a missing camper in an area surrounded by reports of a strange set of wild men seen hunting on the road. The witness who made the report said, "I'd like to report an incident that happened to me in Argyll, Scotland. It was down one of the single-track roads that runs between Tainolt and Delavish, along the side of Loch Arr. Now, there are miles and miles of forestry tracks up there, and you can wander for ages without bumping into anyone. I'm used to doing that journey. I've done it often, and I've never experienced anything like this, and I'll never forget it. It happened on a cool night at 1 a.m. in March 2016. I was coming back from my friends. I hadn't had a drink. I was perfectly sober. As I was driving, I noticed a movement in the older part of the forest. And luckily, when I noticed it and I was driving, it caught my eye. Suddenly, from my left-hand side, I was startled by the sight of a deer running out of the trees and right across the road in front of me. It was running as fast as it could. It was in flight away from something. I didn't have time to think what was chasing it or what it was running from. And as I looked back over my shoulder to see the deer, it was being followed by a large man-like creature. This creature was really tall, very hairy, and he was running, moving at a fast pace. He took one long stride and it covered that road. Without thinking, I slammed on my brakes. I stopped the car. My eyes were fixed firmly on this running man. You see, that thing was off as soon as I hit the brakes, and I turned to look where the deer and he had come from out of the trees, and I saw to my left what looked like another one. This figure was emerging out of the woods, and it was smaller, younger, not so big and muscled, but a wild man type thing, all the same. It wasn't looking at me, but looking towards where the bigger one had run into the trees. I couldn't believe what I'd seen. To this day, I still question it. I did get a good look at both of them. The moon was out, and it was a clear, clean night. It was not like I could have mistaken them. They looked like two wild men that were hunting. The first one that crossed over the road after the deer was probably, I'd say, about 8 feet tall. He had hair all over his body, and he was naked. And it was hard to tell the colour of the hair at night, but it was dark, just like the smaller one. It wasn't a huge road, but even so, his stride must have been at least 6 feet to cover the distance in one leap like that. The way it moved was startling to me. It was fluid and fast. The one on the hill looked smaller, younger, and the eyes on it were strange. The smaller one looked back at me with reflecting, glowing eyes like a dog does in the dark. The smaller one did not follow the larger one, but it backed into the darkness of the trees, and it was off, as it gave me quite a fright. I just got out of there. Now, in the same area of the Highlands, police officers are searching for a missing man. Police Scotland issued a fresh appeal over a missing walker after the man vanished in very unusual circumstances. Neil Skinner, 71, from Doncaster, was last seen close to Loch Deshard in Argyll and Bute on the 8th of the 5th, 2022. Despite extensive searches, no signs of Mr. Skinner have been found. And Police Scotland said his daughter, Kate Armitage, said it's been a very difficult time for the family, not having any news or no answers. Mr. Skinner was last seen camping close to Loch Deshard in Scotland. He'd been on a walking tour with 2 friends when he returned to his tent alone, and he was not feeling well, he said. When his friends returned to the campsite expecting to find him, Mr. Skinner was nowhere to be found, despite all of his clothes and walking equipment being in the tent, along with his phone and his wallet. A police search involving helicopters, drones, and diving equipment and mountain rescue teams were also carried out, but Mr. Skinner was never found. Mr. Skinner is described as being 5'8", with short white hair, have a white goatee type beard and glasses. He was wearing a green jacket and grey walking trousers when he was last seen. So it would seem Mr. Skinner vanished on a lonely lochside. He set off for a hike with friends, and at one point in the walk, he started to feel unwell. So he went back to his tent, stabbed his walking poles into the ground, put his kit, phone in his tent, zipped up the inside of his tent, but not the outside, and has not been seen since. His porridge was still sleeping outside. The place was untouched. They had sonar searched for a body through the waterways, nothing. They got canine dogs out searching the area. The whole area had been searched on foot, even with the helos, but there's no trace of him. If he wandered off and had an accident or died, surely they would have found his clothes or seen signs of carrion birds circling. Well, there was nothing like that had been reported, and the friends were back within a few hours. He was an experienced hiker, and he wouldn't have wandered off without his phone and his kit. Along the same mountain range, John McGlynn reported hearing a strange whooping sound on the 28th of August 2022. He said, I was camping in Glen Orchay last week around 9 p.m. Really clear, beautiful night. I heard a whoop, as clear as day. No other noises in the area at the time. Do you know of any cases close to where a person has gone missing in an area where people report strange activity, Deb? I'd like to see if there's a connection between the area itself and what's happening there. Do areas like this have a dark attractant, an endless supply of evil, for any human or creature that wants to tap into it if it wishes to? If this is the case, then we have a lot of work on our hands, as I believe we can change the energy of an area for the better, given the correct tools and the will to do so. I hope you have enjoyed our show tonight. And if you'd like to read the encounters for yourselves, there is a link to the BBR website in the description. I will be back with you all next week with another exciting edition of the BBR case files. I will update you on the cryptid creature reports at Bidulph and talk of a strange structure that didn't look man-made. But until next week, good night, everyone.